Welcome back to The Price of Disrespect. I read a lot of letters on this channel, but I almost never read one out loud, word for word. This week I'm breaking that rule. It came from a woman named Ruth. She's 65. She spent 40 years as a nurse, the kind who sits with people on the worst night of their lives and counts their breathing until morning. She told me that for 40 years she measured other people's hearts for a living. And then one autumn, at 65, she finally put 2 fingers to her own pulse and found it steadier than anyone in her family had ever bothered to believe. What they tried to do to her at her late husband's memorial story and what she did back without once raising her voice. I want you to hear all of it. If you've ever been treated like a piece of furniture in your own family, useful, silent, easy to move. Tell me one word for how that feels in the comments. Then stay with me. Here's Ruth's story.
Ruth Halloran was up to her elbows in cold storage, turning the last crates of Honeycrisp so the bruised ones wouldn't spoil the sound ones underneath. Her phone buzzed against the steel shelf. She wiped her hands on her jeans and read it standing in the chill, her breath fogging a little in the apple-cold air. It was from Travis, her son. No, hello. Mom, Dad's 10-year memorial is set for the orchard, Saturday the 18th. Around 40 people. You'll host it out there. We already told everyone. She read it once. Then she read it again, slower, the way she used to read a chart when the numbers didn't sit right. There was a window at the end of the storage room, and in the failing light, it threw her reflection back at her. A tall woman in a gray cardigan, silver hair cut to her ears, standing very still among the crates. She watched that reflection not move. She had a habit, after 40 years on hospital floors, of going completely calm in the exact moment most people came apart. It had saved patients. It had saved her more than once. You'll host it. Not would you. Not is that all right, Mom. An assignment. 40 people. 2 hands. Her name nowhere in the deciding of it. She thought about Sam. 10 years gone. 10 years gone. And still the reason there was an orchard at all. She thought about how he would have laughed at the phrase we already told everyone. That dry little laugh he had when somebody put so far ahead of the horse. The horse couldn't see it anymore. She typed slowly, deleted it, typed again. Then you'll want to hire help. I'll be at the back house till Sunday. Send. She turned the screen face down on the shelf and went back to the apples, and her hands, she noticed, were perfectly steady. She turned each one's stem up, checked the shoulders for soft spots, set it down. The work didn't need her mind, which was good, because her mind had gone somewhere cold and quiet and was taking inventory of something else entirely. People in the county had known Ruth's name long before they knew her face. For 40 years, she had been the one at the bedside. She'd started as a floor nurse at the county hospital when the floors were still waxed by hand, worked her way to charge nurse, then ran the hospice wing for the last 15 years before she retired. She had sat with half the town's mothers and fathers, and last night any of them ever had. She had held hands that were going cold and told their owners truthfully that they were not alone, that someone was right here, that they could let go. She knew the exact look a face takes on in its final hour better than she knew her own in the mirror. What almost nobody knew was who she became when she got home and took the badge off. At home, Ruth got quiet. Her own mother had used money the way some people use a leash. A gift on Monday, a guilt trip by Friday, a favor logged in a ledger she'd collect on for the next 10 years. Remember what I did for you. Ruth had grown up on that sentence the way other children grew up on bedtime stories. She had promised herself, somewhere around the age of 19, that she would never hand her own children a single string. So she went the other way entirely. She gave, she stayed quiet, and she asked for nothing back. For decades, she'd called that love. Some of it was. But love and habit get braided together over the years, and after a while, people stop seeing the woman and start seeing the service. The orchard had been Sam's whole life. Wren Hollow. 40 acres of apple and pear on the rise above the creek, named for the little birds that nested in the fence posts and scolded him every spring like he was trespassing on his own land. He'd planted the first 8 trees himself the year they married, grafting scions onto rootstock. With a thin curved knife and a roll of black tape, his tongue between his teeth in concentration. He built the back house first. 1 room, a wood stove, a window that never quite shut, so they'd have somewhere to sleep while the big house went up board by board over 3 summers. He died in the back bedroom of that big house 10 years ago, in October, with Ruth's hand around his wrist, counting until there was nothing left to count. She'd kept the deed in a tin box that still held his grafting knife and their wedding photo, and a ticket stub from some matinee neither of them could ever place afterward. 1 page, a little yellow at the fold. Grantee, Ruth Halloran. 1 name. Sam had put it in her name years back, for tax reasons they'd long since stopped thinking about, and neither of them had ever once treated it like it mattered. It was just paper. It was just the place where they'd raised a boy and buried a husband and let the seasons turn the trees from white to green to gold. Now, back up 6 years, because it matters. 6 years ago, Travis lost his job in the spring. Money got thin, and the voices at his dinner table went thin with it, and Sadie was 4 and didn't understand it, and Owen was barely 7 and understood too much. They were scared, and Ruth was their mother and grandmother, so she did the thing mothers do without weighing it. She opened the big house, the one she and Sam had raised Travis in, and told them to stay until they were back on their feet. A growing family needs room, and a widow, she told herself, needs far less than people think. She moved out to the back house, the one Sam built first, down at the bottom of the orchard by the creek. She liked it there. The window still didn't shut all the way, and on cold nights she could smell wood smoke and apple and the green rot of the creek bank, and it was the closest she ever felt to him anymore. Here is the part nobody ever asked about in all 6 years. She never changed a single line on the deed. Why would she? It was still her home. She still paid the property taxes every December, 11,000 and change, in full, no fuss. She kept the homeowner's insurance in her own name. She let them live there rent-free, year after year, and never once matted a thing, never once said the words, "my house," in a way that had a hook in it. In her own head, she was being generous, the opposite of her mother, a woman with no leash in her hand at all. She could see now, turning apples in the cold, that she had also been making herself invisible. Somewhere in those 6 years, they stopped seeing it as borrowing. The driveway became their driveway. The mudroom filled up with their boots. The orchard became the view out their kitchen window, the thing the realtors would later call the lot. And Ruth had let it happen because correcting them felt like reaching for her mother's leash, and she would rather disappear than become that woman. So she let it sit, a gift she gave freely, in silence, every single day. It had never once crossed her mind that someone might try to pick her pocket with that silence. By the time she carried the last crate to the cooler and pulled the heavy door shut on its rubber seal, the light was almost gone from the window. She drove the gravel track down to the back house with her headlights catching the bare lower branches, and a single wren shot up off a fence post and vanished into the dark hedge, fast and indignant, the way they always did. She made tea she didn't drink. She sat at the small kitchen table Sam had built from Orchard Windfall, and she thought about the flatness of that text. We already told everyone. Not a request that assumed a yes, a decision that hadn't needed her in the room at all. She'd spent her whole working life being everyone's emergency at 3 in the morning, and she had never once minded. That was the job, that was the calling. But this was something else. This had the smell of something already decided. She just didn't know yet how much had been decided, or by how many people, or that her own name was already written into the cast list of a small, sad play she hadn't agreed to be in. That part she'd learned 2 nights later. And it would be worse than a rude text. It would be worse than anything she'd let herself imagine, sitting there in Sam's chair, with the tea going cold, and a wren settling somewhere out in the dark. Diane called the next evening, just as Ruth was setting a single plate on the table by the window. Her younger sister had a particular voice for when she wanted something, warm on the surface, with an edge running underneath it, like a wire under snow. Ruth had been hearing that voice since they were girls. She knew it she knew the difference between a cough that was nothing and a cough that was the beginning of the end. Ruth. Sweetheart. A pause shaped like concern. I just wanted to check on you. I'm fine, Diane. I'm having supper. Out there all alone in that little house. A soft sound, half sigh. That's what I wanted to talk to you about, actually. We're worried about you, honey. You know that, don't you? Ruth set her fork down very quietly beside the plate. 40 years of bedside conversations had taught her that the most important word in any sentence is usually the one the speaker thinks they've slipped past you. We're all, not I, we, worried about me how, she said. You've been so forgetful lately. Distant. Off by yourself down there, at the bottom of the property. Diane's voice dropped into something gentle and rehearsed. It's a lot of orchard for one woman to be rattling around in, Ruth. Especially one who's not as sharp as she used to be. Ruth looked out the window. The light was going violet over the trees. A wren landed on the fence post nearest the glass, cocked its head, and was gone. That's a strange thing to say to me, she said mildly. I turned 40 crates of apples yesterday by hand and didn't lose a single one to soft rot. I balanced the orchard's books on Sunday. I drove myself to the dentist on Thursday. Which part of that worries you? See, you get defensive, Diane said, as though defensiveness itself were a symptom, a rash she could point to. Nobody's attacking you. We love you. We just don't want you struggling all alone and too proud to say so. I'm not struggling. Travis says. And there it was. Ruth let the silence sit for a moment, the way she used to let a silence sit in a hospital corridor, so a frightened family would say the thing they'd come to say. Then, in the same easy voice she'd used to ask the weather, Diane, how did you know the memorial was going to be for 40 people? The line went quiet, not the comfortable quiet of two sisters. The other kind. The kind with a held breath in it. What? Travis told me, obviously. We talk. I only found out about it myself yesterday afternoon, Ruth said. Travis sent me one text. 40 people. Hosting it at the orchard. That was the firstest I'd heard of any memorial. You knew the number before I did. Well, of course we'd talked about. Diane's words came faster now, tripping over the gap they were trying to cover. It's a family event, Ruth. People discuss family events. That's not. You're reading into things again. This is exactly what I mean. You twist everything around lately. I see, Ruth said. I just think you should let the kids take some of this off your plate. They want to help you, honey. That's all this is. I'm sure it is, Ruth said. Thank you for calling, Diane. Give my love to Bill. She set the phone down on the table, face up this time, and she sat very still, while her supper went cold in front of her. Forgetful. Distant. Not as sharp. Diane had said those words like lines she'd run through in the car beforehand. A lot of orchard for one woman. That wasn't worry. Ruth had heard real worry in 1,000 voices over 40 years, and it never came out that smooth. Real worry stammers. Real worry repeats itself. Real worry forgets to be careful. This had been careful all the way through. She'd spent her whole career learning to tell the difference between a symptom and a performance. She knew, the way she knew her own hands, that her sister had just performed for her. Badly, in one spot, the number, 40 people. Diane had known the count before Ruth did, which meant the memorial had been planned in some endeavor Ruth had never been invited into, by people who had decided things about her, around her, the way you make arrangements for someone who isn't expected to have an opinion. The way, Ruth thought with a small cold drop in her stomach, you make arrangements for a patient who can no longer speak for herself. She had stood at the foot of that exact kind of conversation more times than she could count. The grown children in the hallway, voices low. She's confused. She doesn't really understand anymore. We just want what's best. Sometimes it was true and broke your heart, And sometimes, not often, but enough times that Ruth had learned the shape of it. It was something colder wearing the costume of love. She had learned to spot the families who were grieving and the families who were already dividing. The tell was almost always the same. The grieving ones talked about the person, the dividing ones talked about the property. She didn't know yet which one her family was. She told herself, sitting there, that she didn't want to know, that a rude text and a sister with a sharp tongue were the whole of it, that she was tired and reading shadows into an ordinary evening. But she didn't sleep. Around midnight, she gave up on it. She got up, pulled Sam's old wool shirt off the hook by the door over her nightgown, and reached up to the high shelf in the closet where the tin box lived. It was an old fruit company tin, dented at one corner, the painted apple on the lid worn down to a ghost. Sam had kept his grafting things in it for years before it became the box, where they put the things that mattered. The lid came off with the same stubborn little squeak it had always made, and the smell came up at her, metal and old wax, and a faint sweetness that might have been the dried budwood, or might have just been memory. His grafting knife lay on top. The first one, the one with the bone handle gone amber with the oil of his hand. She picked it up and turned it over. The blade was still keen. Sam had stropped his knives the way Ruth swabbed a port. Like sloppiness was a kind of disrespect to the work. She could see him crouched in the young orchard in shirt sleeves, splicing a scion of some old heirloom variety onto sturdy rootstock, wrapping the union in tape, murmuring to the tree like it could hear him. Take now. Go on and take. Half of those grafts had taken. The trees were 40 feet tall now, and every autumn they dropped fruit from a marriage of 2 plants Sam had married, with his own 2 hands. Under the knife was the wedding photo, its corners worn soft from handling. Under the photo was the folder, and in the folder, 1 page. Grantee, Ruth Halloran, 1 name. No cosigner, no mortgage, no clever joint arrangement anyone could lean on. The whole 40 acres, the big house, the back house, the cooler, the trees Sam had grafted with the knife now, sitting in her other hand. All of it, in the plainest language the law has, hers alone. She held the deed and felt nothing strategic. She wasn't holding a weapon. She was holding the place where she'd nursed Travis through chicken pox in the front bedroom, where she'd taught him to read in the bay window, where Sam had died with the maples going red outside the glass. She was holding the only thing left in the world that still smelled when she pressed her face to it, faintly of him. For 6 years, she had said nothing about that single name on that single page. She had swallowed her own ground rather than stand on it, terrified of becoming a woman who waved a deed around like a whip, the way her mother had waved every gift she ever gave. She had confused not controlling people with not protecting myself, and the two had grown together in her until she couldn't see the seam. She didn't see the seam that night either. She wasn't there yet. She told herself again that she was being foolish, that this was a memory, not a tool, that the worst thing happening this week was that her son had no manners and her sister had a sharp tongue. She touched the bone handle of the knife once more. She laid the deed back under the photo and the photo back under the knife and pressed the squeaking lid down until it caught. She made a second cup of tea she didn't drink, and she went back to bed. And outside the window, that never quite shut, the orchard stood black and patient under a thin moon. Every tree exactly where Sam had put it. She had 1 page in a tin box that could end any argument her family would ever try to start. She just didn't know yet that she'd need it. And she didn't know that the people deciding her future were no longer talking about a memorial dinner at all. That 2 days from now a phone would ring before she'd even finished her coffee, and the voice on the other end would belong to someone she'd taught years ago to hold a frightened patient's hand. That call was coming. And it would change everything she thought she understood about how far her own family was willing to go. The phone rang at 6 minutes past 8, while Ruth was standing at the counter with her first coffee, watching frost burn off the lower orchard in the early sun. She almost didn't answer. The number on the screen was the county medical group, and she'd learned long ago that a clinic calling before 9 on a weekday morning was rarely good news. But the name underneath the number stopped her hand halfway to the screen. Dr. P. Anand, she answered. Ruth Halloran, she said, the old reflex, last name first, the way she'd answered a hospital phone for 40 years. Ruth, it's Priya. A breath. I'm so sorry to call you this early. Do you have a minute? I've been going back and forth on whether this was even mine to call about, and I decided I'd rather be wrong and meddling than right and silent. Ruth set her coffee down on the counter. Priya Anand, she could still this girl she'd been 20 years ago, a first-year resident, all elbows in terror, hands actually shaking the night they lost the Pruitt boy to sepsis at 4 a.m. Ruth had taken those shaking hands in the supply room afterward, pressed them flat between her own until they went still, and told her the things she told all of them. You don't get to fall apart in front of the family. You fall apart later, with me, in here, where it's allowed. Priya had cried into a stack of folded gowns and then walked back out and held the Pruitts' hands until dawn. She was a geriatrician now, one of the best in 3 counties. She had also been in the room the night Sam died. She'd been the one to gently take Ruth's fingers off Sam's wrist when there was no longer any pulse to find, and to say, very quietly, He's gone, Ruth. You can stop counting now. Of course I have a minute, Ruth said. What's wrong? 2 of your family members came into my office yesterday afternoon. Priya's voice was careful in the particular way of someone choosing every word. A man and a woman. Travis and Jenna Halloran. They had an appointment they'd booked under a vague reason. Family health concern. I assumed it was about one of them, or a child. A small cold weight settled into Ruth's chest, very precise, the way a stethoscope settles cold against a back. And it wasn't, she said. It wasn't. Priya let out a breath. Ruth, they came to talk about you. They wanted to know what would be involved in getting their words, a formal medical determination that you weren't able to manage your own affairs anymore. Cognitive decline. They asked whether I could evaluate you. They asked whether I could write a letter. And when I said any evaluation would have to be done properly, with you present and consenting, and that I couldn't write anything about a patient I hadn't examined. She stopped. The husband asked if there was any way to expedite it. He used that word, expedite. He said there was a deadline. Ruth closed her eyes. Outside, the frost was lifting off the grass in thin smoke. A deadline, she repeated. That's what he said. I didn't ask what kind. I didn't think it was my place. And frankly, I didn't want to keep them in the room any longer than I had to. A pause. Ruth, I want to be careful here, because I might have the whole thing wrong. But I've sat across the desk from a lot of families in 20 years. I know what it looks like when somebody loves an old person and is scared for them. And I know what it looks like when somebody's a piece of paper. This was the second one. I'd stake my license on it. Ruth said nothing for a moment. She was aware of her own heartbeat. Slow and even, the heartbeat of a woman who had trained herself to be calmest at the worst possible moments. She noticed it the way you notice the weather through a window, from a small clinical distance. You did the right thing calling me, she said finally. There's more, and I went back and forth on this even harder. Prisha's voice dropped. After they left, the husband, Travis, followed up by email, to my work account. I think he assumed that because I'd said the evaluation had to be proper, I was open to being talked into it. People do that. They hear no as the opening price. A short, dry sound, not quite a laugh. Ruth, I'm going to forward you that email. I shouldn't, and I'm going to. Because if it were my mother, I'd want to see it with my own eyes instead of hearing me summarize it. You'll have it in a minute. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry to be the one. Don't be sorry, Ruth said. Be exactly what you've always been. Priya, did you write anything? Sign anything? I wrote one line back. I told him that I would not provide an assessment that hadn't been conducted, that I had documented their request in my own notes, and that If they had genuine concerns about your welfare, they were welcome to schedule an appointment with you and bring you in themselves. A beat. I keep my notes, Ruth. You taught me that too. Document everything. Because the truth doesn't defend itself. You have to leave it somewhere it can be found. Yes, Ruth said softly. I did teach you that. They said their goodbyes the way two people who've sat through long nights together say them, briefly, without performance. Ruth put the phone down on the counter and stood looking at it. It buzzed. She picked it up with both hands and sat down at the small table Sam had built, in the chair by the window, where the morning light came in soft and clean off the orchard, and she opened the email Priya had forwarded. She read it once. Her face did not move at first. 40 years had given her that. Then, slowly, it began to. Her eyes lowered to the screen and stayed there. The corners of her mouth, which were used to holding steady through far worse than this, drew very gently down. Her brows came together as though against a small, persistent pressure. Her eyes filled, not enough to fall, just enough to catch the window light and shine. And her lips pressed into a thin line, the way a person's will, when they are absorbing a blow, they have decided not to make a sound about. She read it twice. The second time was the one that landed. The way the second read of a diagnosis is always the one that breaks the skin. Travis had written it the way you'd write to a contractor about a permit. Brisk, practical, faintly impatient. He wrote that the situation with his mother had become time-sensitive. He wrote that there was an offer on the table for the orchard land. A residential developer, a generous number, a window that closes at the end of next month. He wrote that his mother was increasingly unable to see the practical reality of her own situation and was emotionally attached to the property in a way that wasn't rational anymore. He wrote that the family had a plan to handle it gently, in a family setting, where she'd be comfortable and not feel cornered, but that the plan needed medical backing to hold up, and that was where Dr. Anand came in. He wrote that he was sure they could make it worth the practices while to move quickly. And near the bottom, in a sentence he had clearly typed, without once imagining it would ever be read by the woman it described, he wrote, "She's been pretty checked out since Dad died anyway, so honestly it shouldn't be a hard sell." Ruth set the phone down on the table, face up, in the patch of sun. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, and she let it go all the way through her. The grief came first, oddly. Not anger, grief. The same gray flood she'd felt the morning after Sam died. The one that arrives before the mind has decided what to do. She's been pretty checked out since Dad died, as though her quiet were a symptom. As though the years she'd spent grieving the only man she'd ever loved, down here in the house he built first, by the creek, were not grief at all but evidence. As though her son had taken the worst thing that had ever happened to her and filed as a useful detail. She did not cry. She got up and put the kettle on, because that was what her hands knew to do. And while it heated, she stood at the window and watched a wren work its way along the fence line, post to post, scolding nothing at all. The plan needed medical backing to hold up. In a family setting. The memorial. Of course, the memorial. She was still standing at the window when she heard a car on the gravel, and then small, fast footsteps, and the back house door opened without a knock, the way it only ever did for one person. Grandma. Owen came in already talking 13 and all knees and elbows now, the way Priya had once been. "Mom dropped me. She's got errands. Can I take the good loppers out to the Gravensteins? The low branch is dead, and it's bugging me." He stopped, because Ruth had crossed the room and pulled him into a hug that was a little too hard and a little too long, and he submitted to it the way 13-year-olds do, stiff and patient, smelling of cold air and the inside of his mother's car. "Take the loppers," she said into his hair. "Wear the gloves. The dead one's brittle, it'll snap back." He grinned and went rummaging in the mudroom. She made him cocoa he didn't really have time for, and herself the tea she wouldn't drink, and for a few minutes it was just the two of them at Sam's table, the boy swinging his feet, and telling her about a science project, and a kid named Marcus who'd gotten suspended, and Ruth let the ordinariness of it wash the email off her for a little while. Then Owen, around a mouthful of cocoa, said the thing. Hey, are you going to do a speech at Grandpa's thing? 'Cause Mom and Dad keep practicing theirs. It's kind of weird. They did it like 3 times in the kitchen. Dad had this whole... He kept saying, keep it loving, keep it sad. And Mom kept messing up the part with the brochure and starting over. He shrugged, reaching for a marshmallow. And Uncle Rick's gonna film it, which is dumb. Who films a memorial? Ruth's hands went still around her cup. She kept her face exactly where it was. 40 years. You don't get to fall apart in front of the family. What brochure, sweetheart? She asked, lightly, like it was nothing, like she was asking which marshmallow he wanted. The old people place one. Owen wrinkled his nose. Maple something. There's smiley grandmas on it playing cards. Mom left it on the counter, and I thought it was for like a school thing, and she got super weird and took it away. He looked up, suddenly, a little uncertain, the way a child does when he senses he's wandered into a room that wasn't meant for him. Is it a surprise? Did I wreck a surprise? No, Ruth said gently. You didn't wreck anything. You go get those Gravensteins before your mother comes back. Gloves. He went, banging the door, and through the window. She watched him run up the slope toward the old trees. The loppers over his shoulder. 13, and certain the world was a simple place. So that was the shape of it. Not a quiet conversation, not a letter in the mail. They were going to do it at Sam's memorial. In front of 40 people, with a brochure on the table and Rick's phone running. Diane would open, keep it loving, keep it sad, and Jenna would lay down the smiling grandmothers and somebody would slide papers under her hand while 4 dozen relatives watched, so that if she said no, the no itself would look like the proof. See how she gets. See how confused. See how she fights the people trying to help her. They were going to stand her up at the memorial of the only man who'd ever truly seen her, and use his grave as the stage, and use her grief for him as the evidence she'd lost her mind. She's been pretty checked out since Dad died anyway. Ruth poured the tea down the sink, untouched, and rinsed the cup and set it in the rack. Her hands, she noticed, were still perfectly steady. They didn't just want the orchard. She understood that, fully now, standing in the kitchen Sam built. To take the orchard cleanly, they first had to take her name, her mind, her standing in her own family. And they meant to do it in public. On the one day, she'd be too softened by missing him to fight, surrounded by witnesses, primed to read her grief as decline. She had spent 40 years protecting frightened old people from exactly this. From the smooth voices in the hallway, from the relatives who talked about the property. She had testified at competency hearings. She knew, better than anyone Travis could possibly hire, precisely how a real determination of capacity was made, what it required, and what it could not survive. And she knew one more thing, the thing none of them had thought to check. The thing sitting in a dented tin box on a closet shelf 20 feet away. She picked up her phone. She didn't call Travis. She didn't call Diane. She scrolled to a number she hadn't dialed in over a year, a woman who'd known her friend Sam for 30 years and didn't waste words, and she pressed it. And while it rang, she looked out at her grandson, up in the gold trees, cutting away the dead wood so the living branch could breathe. Helen Mercer answered on the second ring the way she'd answered for 30 years. Ruth Halloran, I was just thinking about you. Sam's memorial's coming up, isn't it? 10 years. A pause, the sound of a chair creaking back. Why do I get the feeling you're not calling about flowers? Because you've never once been wrong about a feeling, Helen. Ruth sat down at the table, in Sam's chair, the morning sun gone now behind a flat gray sheet of cloud. I need to come see you. Today, if you can. And I need you to listen to the whole thing before you tell me I'm imagining it. Because that's the first thing I'm going to want you to tell me, and I need you to resist it. Come at 11, Helen said. I'll move a closing. Bring me coffee from the place on Main, the good one, and bring me everything you've got. Helen Mercer's office smelled the way it had for 3 decades. Old paper, good coffee. The faint tang of the leather chairs Sam used to say, were older than the county courthouse. Ruth sat across the desk from her for the better part of 2 hours. She laid it out the way she'd once laid out a patient's history, for a doctor who needed the truth fast and clean. The text, the flatness of it, the number that gave Diane away. Diane's rehearsed worry on the phone. Priya's call. And then she turned her phone around on the desk and let Helen read the email herself, word for word, because some things you do not summarize. Helen read it twice. Ruth noticed that and was grateful for it. Helen read everything twice. When she finished, she set the phone down very gently, as though it were hot, and took off her glasses and pressed the bridge of her nose. "And the boy?" Helen said. "Owen. He told you about the brochure on his own? You didn't lead him?" "I asked what brochure. That was all. He volunteered the rest. The rehearsing in the kitchen. Keep it loving, keep it sad. The phone that's going to film it. The plan to do it at the memorial." Ruth's voice did not change, but her hands, folded on the desk, pressed a little tighter together. "They're going to do it over Sam, Helen. They picked his day." Helen was quiet for a moment. Then she put her glasses back on and became, visibly, a different woman. The one who'd talked a bank out of foreclosing on the Petersons. The one who'd buried 2 husbands and built a practice in a county that hadn't expected a woman to. "All right," she said. "Let's take the fear out of this and turn it into paper, because paper is the only thing that's ever beaten people like this. First question, and I need the true answer, not the modest one. The deed. Whose name? Mine. One name. Sam put it in my name 15 years ago. No mortgage. No cosigner. No joint anything. And they've lived in the main house how long, paying what? 6 years. Nothing. No lease, no rent, not $1. I pay the taxes and the insurance myself." Helen's mouth curved, not quite a smile. "Then I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to hear it before you let yourself feel sad again, because it's going to matter. Ruth, there is nothing to take. Do you understand me? There is no fight here for them to win. They have built an entire plan on top of a thing that does not exist. They've been living in a house they think is theirs, planning to do something to a woman they think is failing, in order to seize land that is, in the plainest law there is, already, and only yours. The only power they have is the power you've been handing them by staying quiet. And we are going to stop you handing it to them, today, in a way that can never be undone by anyone, including you on a sentimental afternoon. Now, let me tell you exactly what we're going to do." She held up one finger. "One, the tenancy. They have no lease and no written term, which makes them tenants at will. In this state, because they've occupied for more than a year, you have to give them 60 days written notice to vacate. Not 30, 60. It isn't dramatic, and it isn't a trick. It's the oldest, plainest part of property law there is. I'll draw the notice today. We'll date it. We'll have it ready, and we will not serve it 1 minute before you tell me to." A second finger. 2, the land itself. Right now it sits in your name, loose, and as long as it sits loose there is always, always, someone who'll try to talk it, beg it, or trick it out of your hands. So we lock it. We put Wren Hollow into an irrevocable trust. You name the beneficiaries, you set the terms, you keep the right to live there, and farm it for the rest of your natural life. After you, it passes exactly where you say. Once it's in trust, Ruth, there is nothing loose left to sign. No quitclaim, no power of attorney, no signature on God's earth can pull it out, because you won't own it as a thing that can be signed away. The trust will hold it. They can wave 1,000 papers at you at that table. There'll be nothing for the papers to do. Ruth let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding since the cold storage room 3 days ago. "The grandchildren," she said. "Owen and Sadie. I wanted to go to them when they're grown. 25. Then that's how we write it." Helen made a note. Not Travis. Not Jenna. The children. Held in trust until 25, and you living on it till your last day. No secret clauses, no clever instrument anyone can ambush you with. A notice and a trust. Both of them as ordinary as rain, and both of them airtight. A third finger, and here Helen leaned forward. 3. And this is the one only you could have thought of, Ruth, because it's the nurse and not the client. The thing they're building the whole performance on is the idea that you're not competent. So we take that away from them before they can use it. Not at the table, before. We get you a formal cognitive assessment this week by a neutral physician who has nothing to do with your family. A standard instrument. They'll likely use the MOCA. You know it better than I do. Administered properly, documented, dated. So that on the day, if anyone in that orchard so much as breathed the word confused, we have a notarized record from days earlier that says, in clinical black and white, that Ruth Halloran is fully oriented, fully capable, and fully in command of her own affairs. Helen sat back. Most people can't pull that together on short notice. You can, because half the doctors in this county trained under you, and the other half owe you a favor. Ruth looked at her for a long moment, and something in her chest unknotted, an old knot, 6 years old, maybe older. There's a doctor, she said, Priya Nand. She's the one who called me. She's a geriatrician. Capacity assessment is her actual field. And she's already documented their request. If I ask her, she'll do the assessment herself properly, and she'll testify to the rest. A pause. She was in the room when Sam died, Helen. She'd do it for me, and it would be real. That's the part that matters. I don't want a favor that bends the truth. I want the truth. Done right and written down where it can be found. Document everything, Helen said softly. Because the truth doesn't defend itself. Ruth's eyes came up. You've heard me say that. I've heard half this county say it. They got it from you. Helen capped her pen. Now, here's where I'm going to do my job, and you're probably going to overrule me, because I've known you 30 years. The clean way to do this, the kind way even, is the mail. We serve the notice by certified mail today. Quiet, private, no audience. You never have to sit through that memorial at all. You skip the whole ugly scene. By the time they stand up to do their little play, the play's already over, and they just don't know it yet. She folded her hands. That's my advice. As your lawyer, that's what I'd tell any client. Mail it. Stay home. Ruth looked out the office window at Main Street going about its gray business, and she thought about it. She honestly thought about it. It was good advice. It was the advice she'd have given anyone else in the world. No, she said. I knew you'd say no. Helen sighed, but there was something underneath the sigh that wasn't disappointment. Tell me why. So I can write it down and feel professional about it. Because they want witnesses. Ruth turned back from the window. They picked the memorial on purpose, Helen. They want 40 people in the orchard. They want a camera running. They want me cornered and small and crying in front of everyone who ever loved Sam, so that whatever I do next gets remembered as the day poor confused Ruth made a scene. They built a room full of witnesses. She set her hands flat on the desk. So the truth can come out in that same room, in front of those same witnesses, calmly, once, where it can be found. You don't have to prove anything to those people, Ruth. I'm not proving anything. Her voice was very quiet, very level. I've got nothing to prove. I'm just going to stop hiding what's already true. There's a difference, and it took me 65 years in a tin box to find it. Helen looked at her across 30 years of friendship, and then she did smile. Finally, a small, fierce thing. You're going to walk straight into your own ambush, she said. I'm going to keep my word and go to my husband's memorial, Ruth said. I'm just going to bring the right papers. She made 3 more calls that week. The first was to Priya, who listened and was quiet, and then said only Tuesday. Come to the office Tuesday morning, and we'll do it properly, and I'll have my notes from their visit ready as well. Ruth. I'd be honored. On Tuesday, Ruth sat across a desk and answered every question, drew the clock, repeated the 5 words, counted backward by 7s, named the date and the season and the place, and watched a younger woman she'd once studied in a supply room write down, in a clinician's careful hand, what Ruth had known about herself all along. Priya signed it. A notary stamped it. Ruth folded the copy, and put it in her bag next to the sealed notice Helen had drawn, and a printout of the email, and a copy of the deed with the county seal crisp and fresh on it. The second call was to a woman named Carol, who ran the only catering outfit in the county that could feed 40 on short notice, to confirm the food for the memorial. Because Ruth had decided that Sam would be honored properly, no matter what else happened that day, that there would be good ham, and there would be good ham and her mother-in-law's scalloped potatoes and the apple pie made from their own Gravensteins, and that no one at that table would go hungry while the truth got told. The third call she didn't make to anyone. She just texted the family thread, sweet as anything, the way they expected a softening old woman to text. Looking forward to Saturday, everyone. So glad we're all gathering for Sam. Save me a seat. Travis replied inside a minute. Glad you came around, Mom. She almost laughed out loud alone in the back house. He thought a kind text meant surrender. He thought she'd folded. Somewhere, she knew, they were congratulating each other in a chat she couldn't see. She's coming. She's bringing pie. She'll sit where she's told and sign what she's handed. She let them think it. A woman who'd spent 40 years learning when to speak and when to wait, knew exactly what a closed mouth was worth. And now, the part she'd never told a soul in her family, because it had never once occurred to them to ask. 40 years ago, Ruth had been a farmer's daughter with a high school diploma and $80, who took the bus 2 counties over to nursing school because the local one wouldn't take her. She'd worked the night shift. Through her training, scrubbed bedpans, got yelled at by doctors who've since forgotten her name, though she has never forgotten a single one of theirs. She made charge nurse at 34. She ran the medical floor, then the whole nursing staff, then built the hospice wing out of nothing but a grant, a stubborn streak, and 6 years of 18-hour days. Because she still believed, that no one should die among strangers who were in a hurry. She had sat with the dying parents of half the people who would be at that memorial. She had held the hand of Bill's own father, Diane's father-in-law, through 3 nights, the last winter of his life. She had trained the residents, who were now the doctors of this county, including the one who'd be sitting at the table on Saturday, with a notarized assessment in her bag. Half the room on Saturday would be people who, somewhere in the worst hour of their lives, somewhere in the worst hours, had looked up and found Ruth Halloran's calm face, telling them it was all right, that their mother could hear them, that they should say the thing now. Her family saw a quiet widow who liked her little house by the creek and had gone soft and vague with grief. They had forgotten, or had never bothered to learn, that the soft, vague woman they planned to declare incompetent had spent 4 decades being the single steadiest mind in every emergency room she'd ever walked into. That being underestimated, Ruth thought, folding the last paper into her bag. That was a lonely thing, and a quiet thing, and the most useful disguise a woman could ever wear. On Saturday, she was going to take the disguise off, at her husband's memorial, in front of everyone. And she was not going to raise her voice one single time. She just had to get through 3 more days of being told, by people who loved her at full volume, how very confused she'd become. Saturday came in clear and cold, the kind of October morning Sam had loved best, when the air had an edge to it and the trees stood gold against a hard blue sky. Ruth drove up to the main house early, before any of the cars arrived, and told herself it was to help set up. The truth was, she wanted to stand in the orchard a while by herself, before it filled with people, and feel him in it one more time on his own day. They'd set the long tables out under the oldest Gravensteins, the ones Sam had grafted the first spring. White cloths, borrowed folding chairs, a framed photograph of him propped at the head of the longest table. Sam in his work shirt, squinting into the sun, a grafting knife in one hand and a scion in the other, caught mid-sentence the way he always was. Somebody had set apples down the center of the tables instead of flowers. Their own apples. Ruth touched one as she passed and found it cold and firm and perfect, and had to stop for a moment with her hand flat on the white cloth until the thing in her throat went back down. She was coming up the porch steps, when she heard Jenna's voice through the open kitchen window, low and tight, talking to someone smaller. "Not going to lose this place, baby. I promise you that. We are not losing this house." A child's voice, Sadie's, too soft for the words to carry. "Because when I was little, we never once had a place that was really ours," Jenna said, and her voice thinned out and caught. "We packed up and moved more times than I can count. I slept in a car once, before you were born, and I swore that would never be you, baby. Not ever. So you let Mommy handle the grown-up part today, and you just be sweet to Grandma, all right? Be extra sweet to Grandma today." Ruth stood on the porch step with her bag on her shoulder and her hand on the rail, and the whole thing got complicated in a way she hadn't let herself prepare for, because Jenna wasn't a cartoon. She wasn't a villain twirling a mustache over a deed. She was a frightened woman who had decided, somewhere in the cold arithmetic of her own childhood, that Ruth's security was an acceptable price for her children's. Ruth knew that fear. She had spent her own life outrunning a version of it, the farmer's daughter with $80, who'd never quite believed the floor would hold. For one full breath standing on the steps, she almost softened. She almost thought, maybe there's a gentler way to do this. Maybe I take Jenna aside, just the two of us. And then she heard the other sentence again, the one from the email, in Travis's brisk, practical voice. "She's been pretty checked out since Dad died anyway, so honestly, it shouldn't be a hard sell." Fear, explained Jenna. It did not explain the brochure. It did not explain Rick's phone, or keep it loving, keep it sad, or choosing Sam's memorial as the stage, or the decision, made in some room Ruth was never in. That the cleanest way to protect Sadie's future was to stand Ruth up in front of 40 people and erase her. Fear was a reason. It was not an excuse. Ruth had learned the difference at a great many bedsides, and she did not unlearn it now. She straightened her collar, the gray cardigan over the white blouse, and went in through the kitchen, and was so warm and so easy that Jenna, turning fast with her eyes still red, never suspected she'd heard a word. By noon, the orchard was full. They came the way country families come, in waves of slammed car doors and casseroles, and kids let loose to run wild in the rows. Cousins Ruth saw once a year. 2 of Sam's old friends from the Orchardist Association, men in their 70s now, who shook her hand with both of theirs, and didn't let go right away. Diane in her good pearls, holding court near the cider table. The Petersons, whose mother Ruth had nursed through a long bad winter. The Aldridge boy, grown now, whose father had died holding Ruth's hand. The minister's widow. A dozen more faces that turned toward Ruth as she moved among them with the particular softness people wear toward someone they've been quietly told to feel sorry for. Poor Ruth. So hard, the anniversary. She's not been herself. Carol's staff moved through it all in dark aprons, quiet and precise, setting out the ham and the scalloped potatoes and the pies. Ruth had asked Carol for one small thing, privately that morning, and Carol, who had buried her own mother with Ruth at the bedside, had only nodded and said, of course, "Honey, however you want it." Ruth made her rounds like a good grandmother and a good widow. She accepted the soft, sympathetic hands on her arm. She let Diane kiss her cheek and tell her how rested she looked, which is what people say when they mean something else entirely. She admired the apples down the center of the tables that she herself had grown. Owen found her by the cider and hugged her hard around the middle and whispered that the dead Gravenstein branch had snapped back exactly like she said and nearly got him in the eye, and she laughed, a real laugh, and held the back of his head for a second longer than he knew. Sadie, 10 and solemn, and clearly under instructions, came and took Ruth's hand and held it through an entire conversation she didn't follow, and Ruth held it back and thought, none of this is yours, baby. Not 1 ounce of this is yours. Her bag stayed on her shoulder the whole time. Inside it, folded together, the deed with the county seal, the sealed 60-day notice, the notarized assessment Priya had signed on Tuesday, and the printout of an email. She never touched it. She just felt its small certain weight against her hip, the way you feel a hand on your shoulder from someone standing just behind you. She noticed the chair, of course, the head of the table near Sam's photograph, with a single sheet of paper lying face down beside a good pen. She'd noticed it the moment she walked under the trees. Travis kept glancing at it the way a man checks a stove he's left on. He thought she hadn't seen it. She'd been reading What People Didn't Say for 40 years, and she noticed, near the kitchen door, a small, composed woman in a dark coat she didn't take off, with a leather folder under her arm and a still, watchful way of standing. Priya had come, as Ruth's guest. Their eyes met across the crowd exactly once. They did not nod. They didn't need to. Helen Mercer arrived at 1:45 and stood at the edge of the gathering near the porch, gray-coated, holding nothing but a plain envelope, looking for all the world like a friend of the family who'd come to pay respects. Ruth had asked her to come as a guest. She had come as a lawyer. Ruth caught her eye, and Helen gave the smallest possible incline of her head and went back to watching the room the way Ruth had once taught 100 night shift nurses to watch a ward. They served the plates at 1:30. The orchard filled with the good warm noise of 40 people eating under the trees on a cold bright day, remembering a man who'd planted most of what they could see. For a little while, it was only that, a memorial. Sam's old friend stood and told a story about Sam talking to a sick tree for an hour, like it was a man with a fever. And everyone laughed, and Ruth laughed too, and it was true, and it was sweet. And for the length of that story, she let herself simply miss her husband among people who'd loved him. Then Travis stood up. He tapped his glass with the edge of a knife, and the orchard quieted in that pleased, expectant way, faces turning toward the head of the table where the photograph of his father watched the whole thing with a scion in his hand. Before we go on, Travis said, I want to say something, as a family, about Dad and about Mom. A few heads turned, warm, unsuspecting. 10 years today. And I think Dad would want us to take care of each other the way he took care of all this. He gestured at the trees, his voice catching on cue. And lately, some of us have been worried. About Mom. Diane set down her fork. We have, she said, soft and grave, pressing a hand to her pearls. We all love you. So much, Ruth. And it's been so hard since Sam. You out there all alone in that little house, forgetting things, this whole big orchard to manage on your own. Her eyes were wet. They were genuinely wet. Diane had always been able to do that. We're just so worried, sweetheart. We only want what's best. Jenna rose next, dabbing at her eyes, and reached into a tote bag at her feet. She drew out a glossy trifold and laid it on the white cloth, turning it so the table could see. Smiling silver-haired strangers playing cards at a sunny table. Maple Court Senior Living in soft script across the top. There's a beautiful place, Jenna said gently, to the whole gathering now. We toured it. They'd take such good care of you, Mom. And we'd protect the orchard for the kids, keep it in the family, so you'd never have to worry about a thing again. Her voice was kind. Her hands were shaking, and Ruth, watching, believed both things at once. That she was frightened, and that she was doing this anyway. Near the back, the cousin named Rick lifted his phone and held it up, angled at Ruth, filming for the memories. For the record. 40 faces turned toward her, all arranged into that same soft pity, the look people wear when they've already decided you are a thing to be managed rather than a person to be asked. And Travis came around the table to her, carrying the face-down paper and the good pen, and he crouched low beside her chair, so the whole orchard could see how gentle he was being, how loving. This good son kneeling at his mother's side under his father's photograph. All you have to do is put your name right here, Mom, he said, low and warm, setting it down beside her plate and turning it over. A power of attorney, a transfer of the property. Her name typed neat on the line, waiting for her hand to make it true. It takes the orchard off your shoulders for good. Let us carry it from here. You've done enough. Dad would tell you the same thing if he could. For everyone's peace of mind, Diane added softly from across the table. The orchard held its breath. The brochure on the cloth, the phone running. A kind son crouched at her chair. The photograph of Sam at the head of the table. Every piece of the little play set perfectly in place, exactly as it had been rehearsed 3 times in a kitchen. And Ruth sat at the center of it with her hands folded in her lap and her bag against her hip, and she understood with a strange settling calm that the ache she'd been carrying since the cold storage room had finally arrived at the exact spot it had been traveling toward all week. She reached out and picked up the pen. She heard Jenna exhale. She saw Travis's shoulders drop, the smallest relief. And then Ruth set the pen back down, uncapped, beside the paper, and she said, in the most ordinary voice she owned, the voice she'd used to ask 1,000 frightened families one simple question at 1,000 bedsides. "Before I sign anything, I think we ought to hear from the doctor first." She looked up, and her gray-blue eyes were perfectly clear, and they found the small, composed woman standing by the kitchen door. "Wouldn't that be the right thing, Priya?" And Dr. Priya Anand stepped forward into the gold light under the trees, opening the leather folder in her hands. Priya crossed the grass with the unhurried walk of a woman who has delivered hard news in quiet rooms her entire adult life. She stopped beside Ruth's chair, and she spoke to the table the way she'd speak to a family in a consult, clear, warm, without a wasted word. "My name is Dr. Priya Anand. I'm a geriatric physician with the county medical group. Mrs. Halloran asked me here today, and there are 2 things I need to share, because they both bear on what's just been put in front of her." She opened the folder. First, "This past Tuesday, at Ruth's request, I carried out a full cognitive assessment, a standard validated instrument, given and recorded properly, witnessed and notarized. I'll be plain, because plain is kinder than soft. Ruth Halloran is fully oriented, fully capable. She has no cognitive impairment of any kind. She is, frankly, sharper than most people half her age, and I'd say so under oath, which is more or less what this notarized record amounts to." She set a stamped page on the white cloth, beside the brochure, beside the transfer. The orchard had gone very still. Somewhere up in the trees, a wren scolded once and fell silent. "Like, that's a mistake," Travis said, still crouched by the chair, his voice gone tight. "She had a good day. Doctors get fooled. She knows how to seem. That brings me to the second thing." Priya did not raise her voice. If anything, she lowered it so that the back of the gathering had to lean in to catch it. 11 days ago, Mr. Halloran, you and your wife came to my office. You asked me to produce a medical finding that your mother could no longer manage her own affairs. When I told you any such finding would require examining her, with her consent, you asked me whether it could be, your word, expedited, because there was a deadline. Then you followed it up in writing, by email, which I've kept, as I'm required to. In it, you explained that a developer's offer on this land closes at the end of next month, and that you needed medical backing to move your mother off it. She let that settle for exactly 1 breath. I declined. I documented the request. I'm a mandatory reporter, Mr. Halloran. What you laid out for me is a plan to obtain a false finding of incapacity in order to take an elderly woman's property. I'd have been obligated to report it whether the woman was a stranger or my dearest friend. She happens to be both my friend and the finest nurse I ever trained under. Rick's phone came down an inch. Then another. Then he forgot to raise it again. Travis got to his feet, his face going through red toward white. "After everything we've done," he started, much too loud now, the warmth gone out of him all at once. "We've kept this place up. 6 years. You've lived here 6 years, Ruth said. She said it quietly, and because she said it quietly, the whole orchard stopped to hear it. She stood up from her chair. She didn't need to, but she wanted to be at her son's eye level for this, and she opened her bag, and she took out the deed with the county seal and laid it on the white cloth, next to the transfer they'd brought, next to the brochure with its smiling strangers. 6 years and never a dollar in rent, she said. I've paid the taxes, $11,000 a year. I've paid the insurance. I never once asked you for any of it back. And I never once said the word that would have reminded you whose name was on the door, because I was so frightened of turning into my own mother that I forgot to be myself instead. She rested 2 fingers on the deed, 1 page, 1 name, Ruth Halloran. It isn't old, and it isn't a mistake. There is one name on this land. There has only ever been one name. Sam put it there because he trusted me to know what to do with it when the time came. You invited 40 people to his orchard today. You simply forgot to ask the one person it belongs to. Jenna was crying now, the real kind and the performing kind so tangled together you couldn't have parted them with a knife. How can you do this? Today, at Sam's memorial, in front of all these people? Ruth looked at her and felt no anger at all, which surprised her more than anything else that day. I heard you on the porch, Jenna, she said gently. Talking to Sadie. I know what you're afraid of. I've spent my whole life afraid of the very same thing. A beat. But I read the email. She's been pretty checked out since Dad died anyway, so it shouldn't be a hard sell. You took the worst thing that ever happened to me, and you wrote it down as leverage. She turned to the table, to the 40 faces. I won't read you the rest of it. You've heard plenty of the performance live. Then she nodded, once, toward the porch. Helen Mercer crossed the grass in her gray coat and held the plain envelope out to Travis. He took it the way people do, his hand opening before his mind caught up. What you're holding is a formal notice to vacate, Helen said, clear and unhurried. Served lawfully in writing. It gives you and Jenna 60 days to move out of the property. Every line of it is correct. She paused and added, not unkindly, take it to an attorney of your own. I'd want you to. And there's one more thing you should all hear, Ruth said, so that nobody at this table ever spends another minute imagining there's something here left to fight over. She looked around at all of them, the cousins, Sam's old friends, the people whose dying parents she had held through the night. As of this week, Wren Hollow is held in trust. The orchard goes to Owen and Sadie, to the children, when they turn 25. I live on it and farm it for as long as I'm able, and then it's theirs. It can't be bought, sold, signed, or coaxed out of my hands by anyone, because I no longer own it as a thing that can be taken from me. There's nothing loose left to sign. She looked at her son and her voice went very soft. I didn't take a single thing from your children, Travis. I made certain no one ever could. The orchard was silent. Up at the head of the table, Sam looked out of his photograph with a sign in his hand, caught mid-sentence forever. Nobody had to announce that it was over. You could read it on all 40 faces. One of Sam's old friends got up, walked the length of the table, and put his hand on Ruth's shoulder without a word, and then went and stood beside her, and that was its own kind of verdict. Diane's mouth had closed somewhere around the word report, and had not opened since. Rick had put his phone all the way back in his pocket. Nobody wanted footage of the confused old woman anymore, because there wasn't one. Ruth picked up her bag. She left the deed lying on the cloth for as long as anyone cared to read it. She didn't gloat. There was nothing left in her that wanted to. The ache had finally reached its home and gone quiet. She crouched down between Owen and Sadie, who had watched the whole thing wide-eyed from the end of the table. None of this is about you two, she told them. Not one bit of it. I love you both to the moon and back, and I'll see you very soon. And come spring, you and I are going to graft the new Gravensteins together with Grandpa's knife. All right? Owen, 13, and trying so hard to be a man about it, nodded fast and blinked. Sadie put both arms around Ruth's neck and held on. Then Ruth straightened up and spoke to the orchard, easy and clear. The meal's taken care of, all of it. Sam loved a full table more than just about anything in this world, so please, stay. Sit, eat, take your time. The pie's from our own Gravensteins. She let herself smile, just a little. He'd have wanted that more than anything that's happened here today. She thanked Carol at the cider table and squeezed Priya's hand at the kitchen door and stopped a moment in front of Sam's photograph. And then she put on her coat and turned to the people still frozen at her husband's memorial and said the last thing she'd come there to say. I'll be at the back house till Sunday. She walked down through the gold trees Sam had planted, got into her car, and drove down the gravel track toward the little house by the creek, and a wren shot up off the last fence post. and vanished into the hedge, fast and indignant, the way they always did. They were gone in 51 days, 9 days early, to stay ahead of the formal filing Helen had ready. They rented a place in town. The developer's offer closed at the end of next month, with no one able to sign it away, and the orchard simply stayed what it had always been. Sam's trees, Ruth's land, the children's someday. Diane tried twice that November. The first call wore an apology. The second, once the apology had bought her nothing, got around to what her cut would be. Ruth told her there was no cut, there had never been a cut, and there would be no more calls, and there haven't been. She finds she sleeps just fine. Travis still speaks to her, carefully, on the phone on holidays. He has never once said he's sorry, not really. He'll say it was a hard year, that he was under a great deal of pressure. But pressure explained is not the same thing as wrong admitted, and Ruth has finally learned to tell those two apart. She lets him keep his version. She doesn't need the confession. What she needed was for him to learn where the line was. And now he knows it. The line is bright, and it holds. But she kept the grandchildren, and that was the thing she'd been most afraid of losing. Back at the kitchen table, with the cold tea and the email shining up at her, she picks them up every other Saturday. That spring, Owen grafted 4 new scions onto rootstock with Sam's bone-handled knife, his tongue between his teeth in exactly his grandfather's concentration, and 2 of them took. They make cocoa at the back house and skip stones in the creek, and they don't talk about the memorial at all. She still has the family over sometimes. She wants people to know that. She isn't bitter, and she never stopped loving any of them. Not Travis, not even Diane. But now she opens her table when someone thinks to ask, not when someone hands her a guest list. For most of her life, those 2 things felt like the same thing. They don't anymore, and learning the difference took her 65 years and a dented tin box on a closet shelf. The orchard stayed hers. Sam's name stayed on every tree the way it always would. And Ruth Halloran, who had spent 40 years counting other people's heartbeats until there were none left to count, finally sat still long enough one autumn to count her own, and found it strong and steady and entirely hers to spend. That's where Ruth's letter
ended. She added one line at the very bottom, just for me, and I'm going to read it to you because I think it holds the whole story in a single sentence. She wrote, "For 40 years, I believed that loving people meant never closing a door on them. It took me until 65 to understand that a gate left open isn't generosity. It's just an invitation for someone to wander in and help themselves to the orchard." She didn't shout. She didn't burn anything down. She simply stopped disappearing and let one true page speak for her in a room full of people who'd been told she had lost her mind. So I'll leave you with the question she left me with. When the people you love decide your life without ever once asking you, do you come apart or do you go quiet and get ready? There's no wrong answer. Tell me which one you are down in the comments. I'm so glad you spent this time with me. Subscribe, and I'll see you next time here on The Price of Disrespect.